The daycare teacher was fired after a complaint, but the millionaire saw the children's book she carried. It was the same one he used to read to his daughter every night before she disappeared 23 years ago. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Sunshine Daycare, casting long shadows across the colorful but worn carpet where 23 children sat in a perfect circle. Lauren Carter Whitmore's voice carried the gentle melody of "The Wheels on the Bus" as tiny hands clapped along, their faces bright with the kind of pure joy that only children possess. "Miss Lauren! Miss Lauren!" 4-year-old Emma tugged at her teacher's sleeve, her pigtails bouncing with excitement. "Can you read us the Star Book again?" Lauren's fingers instinctively moved to the worn paperback tucked into her cardigan pocket. "The Heart of the Stars." The book's cover was faded, its spine cracked from countless readings, but to Lauren, it was more precious than any treasure. She'd carried it everywhere for as long as she could remember, though she couldn't quite explain why. "After lunch, sweetheart," Lauren promised, smoothing Emma's hair. "Right now, we need to clean up for outside time," from across the room. Monica Harris Caldwell watched the interaction with narrowed eyes. The daycare director's lips pressed into a thin line as she observed how effortlessly Lauren commanded the children's attention, how they gravitated toward her like flowers turning toward sunlight. At 45, Monica had dedicated her life to this place, yet the children barely tolerated her presence. The unfairness of it all gnawed at her insides like acid. Monica's hand unconsciously moved to her flat stomach, a gesture that had become habit over the years. 3 miscarriages, 2 failed IVF attempts, a husband who'd left her for a younger woman who'd given him twins within a year. And here was Lauren, barely 27, unmarried, seemingly unaware of her own maternal gifts, receiving the unconditional love that Monica craved but could never earn. "Children, let's line up for the playground," Lauren called out, her voice carrying that magical quality that made even the most stubborn child obey. As the kids scrambled to form a line, little Marcus, the newest addition to their group, hung back, tears streaming down his face. "Hey there, buddy." Lauren knelt beside him, her voice soft as velvet. "What's wrong?" "I miss my mommy," Marcus whispered, his bottom lip trembling. Lauren's heart clenched. She recognized that look, the confusion, the fear, the desperate need for comfort. Without hesitation, she gathered the boy into her arms, humming a tune that seemed to come from some deep, forgotten place within her. "Your mommy will be back after snack time," she whispered, "and until then, I'm right here with you." "Okay." Monica watched this display of natural compassion, and something dark twisted in her chest. She'd tried for years to connect with the children the way Lauren did, but they always seemed to sense something was missing in her. The board meetings, the parent conferences, the state inspections. They all praised Lauren while barely acknowledging Monica's 20 years of dedication. The playground incident happened so quickly that later, when Monica replayed it in her mind, she could barely believe her luck. The children were playing their usual games, some on the swings, others on the slide. A group of them engaged in an elaborate game of tag. Lauren was pushing Emma on the swing when she heard Marcus crying from the monkey bars. He'd attempted to cross them alone and had fallen, scraping his knee on the rubber matting below. "Oh, sweetie," Lauren rushed over, immediately assessing the minor injury. It was barely a scratch, but to a 4-year-old, it might as well have been a mortal wound. She cleaned the scrape with a wet wipe from her pocket and applied a colorful band-aid, complete with stars that made Marcus giggle, despite his tears. From the window of her office, Monica witnessed the entire scene. A slow smile spread across her face as an idea began to form, an idea so perfect, so beautifully destructive, that she almost laughed out loud. Within an hour, Monica had crafted her story. She called Marcus's mother first, her voice dripping with concern. "I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, Mrs. Patterson, but there's been an incident. Your son was injured while under Miss Whitmore's supervision. She was distracted, talking to another teacher instead of watching the children properly." The lie came so easily that Monica almost believed it herself. She embellished the details. How Lauren had been flirting with the maintenance man. How Marcus had been crying for help while Lauren ignored him. How the injury could have been much worse. By the time the school board convened their emergency meeting the next morning, Monica had contacted 3 other parents. Planting seeds of doubt about Lauren's competence, she documented everything in official-looking reports, complete with timestamps and witness statements that painted Lauren as negligent and unprofessional. Lauren sat in the sterile conference room, her hands folded in her lap, trying to process the accusations being hurled at her like stones. The board members, people she'd known for 3 years, people who'd praised her dedication just months before, now looked at her with suspicion and disappointment. "Miss Whitmore," the board president's voice was cold as winter rain. "These are very serious allegations. Multiple parents have expressed concerns about your supervision of their children, but that's not what happened." Lauren's voice cracked with emotion. "Marcus fell because he tried the monkey bars by himself. I was right there. I took care of him immediately." Monica leaned forward, her expression a masterpiece of false concern. "Lauren, I understand this is difficult, but we have to think about the children's safety. Perhaps you've been overwhelmed lately. I've noticed you seem distracted." The words hit Lauren like physical blows. Distracted? She lived and breathed for these children. They were the reason she got up every morning, the reason she'd chosen a profession that barely paid enough to cover her tiny apartment rent. "I need to see the incident report," Lauren said, her voice stronger now. "I want to know exactly what I'm being accused of." Monica slid a folder across the table as Lauren read the fabricated account of her supposed negligence. Her face went pale. Every detail was twisted, every moment of care transformed into evidence of incompetence. "This isn't true," she whispered. "None of this is true." But the decision had already been made. The board couldn't risk a lawsuit, couldn't afford to ignore multiple parent complaints. Lauren Carter Whitmore was terminated immediately, effective at the end of the day. As Lauren cleaned out her small desk, the children gathered around her. Sensing something was wrong, Emma clutched at her skirt, tears streaming down her face. "Miss Lauren, where are you going? Are you coming back tomorrow? I don't want you to leave." Each question was a dagger to Lauren's heart. How could she explain to these innocent souls that sometimes bad things happen to good people? That sometimes the world was unfair in ways that made no sense? "I have to go away for a while," she managed to say, her voice thick with unshed tears. "But I want you all to remember something very important. You are all stars, shining bright in the sky. Never let anyone tell you different." She hugged each child goodbye, her heart breaking a little more with each embrace. As she reached the door, she turned back one last time to see Monica standing in the corner, arms crossed, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The late afternoon sun felt harsh against Lauren's face as she walked down the street, her small box of belongings clutched against her chest. Inside the box, nestled between a few personal items and cards from the children, lay the heart of the stars, her constant companion, her source of comfort. For the first time in her adult life, Lauren Carter Whitmore was completely alone, walking through the streets of Chicago with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The weight of injustice pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden, but she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, clutching her mysterious book like a lifeline. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. That destiny was already in motion, drawing her toward a collision with the past that would shatter everything she thought she knew about herself. The city hummed around her, cars honking, people rushing past, the ordinary chaos of urban life continuing while her world lay in ruins. But somewhere in the distance, in a glass tower that scraped the sky, a pair of green eyes was about to recognize something impossible, something that would turn 2 broken lives upside down and set in motion a love story. 23 years in the making, the streets of downtown Chicago blurred past Lauren as she walked aimlessly, her feet carrying her toward the heart of the financial district without conscious thought. The box of her belongings felt heavier with each step, though it contained so little. A coffee mug with a chip in the handle, a few thank you cards from parents, some crayons the children had given her, and of course, her treasured book. 23 floors above the bustling street, Daniel Walker Kingsley stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, staring down at the ant-like figures below. At 51, he commanded an empire worth billions, yet the view from his ivory tower brought him no satisfaction. His reflection in the glass showed a man who looked older than his years, silver threading through his dark hair, lines etched deep around green eyes that had seen too much sorrow. "Mr. Kingsley," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The Tokyo investors are ready for the conference call. Daniel's hand moved unconsciously to the framed photograph on his desk. A little girl with golden curls and eyes like emeralds, laughing as she reached for soap bubbles floating in a garden. Luna, his baby girl, gone for 23 years, 4 months, and 17 days. But who was counting? Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, Jennifer. He'd built this financial empire as a monument to his grief, working 18-hour days to avoid going home to the silence of his penthouse. Success had come easily, too easily, as if the universe was mocking him by giving him everything, except the one thing that mattered. The ritual was always the same. Every evening at 6:30, Daniel would drive to his estate in Lake Forest, climb the stairs to Luna's perfectly preserved bedroom, and read aloud from The Heart of the Stars, her favorite book, the one he'd read to her every night since she was 2 years old, the last thing he'd promised to read to her the night she disappeared. "Daddy will read about the Princess Star tonight, won't you?" Those had been her last words to him, spoken through sleepy giggles as he'd kissed her forehead and promised he'd be home early from his business dinner. But he hadn't been home early. He'd stayed out until nearly midnight, closing a deal that seemed so important at the time. When he'd returned, the house was dark. Elizabeth was passed out in their bedroom with an empty bottle of wine beside her, and Luna's bed was empty. Daniel forced himself to turn away from the window. The Tokyo deal wouldn't negotiate itself, and keeping busy was the only thing that kept the darkness at bay. He gathered his papers and headed for the conference room, his Italian leather shoes echoing in the marble hallway. 3 hours later, exhaustion weighed on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The Tokyo investors had been satisfied, but Daniel felt hollow, going through the motions of a life that had lost its meaning long ago. As he stepped onto the street, the cool April air hit his face, and for a moment, he considered walking instead of taking his usual car service. That decision, that simple choice to walk instead of ride, would change everything. Lauren had been wandering for hours, her initial shock giving way to a dull numbness. She'd used her last $20 to buy a cup of coffee and a stale sandwich from a street vendor, but the food sat like cardboard in her mouth. The reality of her situation was starting to sink in. No job, no references Monica would provide, and barely enough savings to cover next month's rent. She found herself on LaSalle Street, surrounded by towering buildings that housed the city's financial elite. The contrast wasn't lost on her. Here she was, clutching a cardboard box like a homeless person, while around her moved men and women in $1,000 suits. Their biggest worry probably whether to have the lobster or the filet mignon for dinner. A group of business executives brushed past her, talking loudly about stock options and merger opportunities. One of them bumped into her shoulder, never bothering to apologize or even acknowledge her existence. The impact sent her box tumbling to the sidewalk, its contents scattering across the concrete. No, no, no. Lauren dropped to her knees, frantically gathering her few possessions before they could be trampled by the endless stream of foot traffic. Her hands shook as she reached for the scattered crayons. The crumpled thank you cards, the Heart of the Stars, lay open on the sidewalk, its worn pages fluttering in the evening breeze. Lauren's breath caught in her throat as she gently lifted the book, checking for damage. The binding was a little looser, and there was a small tear in the cover that hadn't been there before. But it was okay. It was going to be okay. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of roughness around the edges. Lauren looked up from where she knelt on the sidewalk to find a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit standing over her. For a moment, she was struck by his eyes, the most incredible shade of green she'd ever seen, like emeralds catching the light. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked, though his gaze had already moved to the book in her hands, and something inside his chest was starting to fracture. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But there it was, the same edition, the same publisher, the same small tear in the bottom corner of the cover that Luna had made when she was 3, trying to turn the pages too quickly in her excitement. "I'm fine," Lauren managed, though she clearly wasn't. There was something vulnerable about her, something that reminded him of a wounded bird. "Just dropped my things." Daniel's hands were trembling now as he reached down to help her up. His eyes never left the book. "That's an interesting book you have there." Lauren clutched it protectively against her chest. It was my favorite when I was little. I know it's silly, carrying around a children's book at my age, but no." The word came out more forcefully than Daniel intended. No, it's not silly at all. Could I see it for a moment? Something in his voice made Lauren hesitate. There was a desperate quality to it, an urgency that didn't match the polite words. But when she looked into those green eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Pain. Deep, soul-crushing pain that she recognized because she'd seen it in her own mirror for as long as she could remember. Slowly, she extended the book toward him. Daniel's hands shook as he took it, and the moment his fingers touched the familiar cover, tears began streaming down his face. He opened it carefully, reverently, to the title page where Luna had scribbled her name in purple crayon. Luna K, in shaky 4-year-old handwriting. The sound that escaped his lips was somewhere between a sob and a prayer. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely a whisper. Lauren stared at him in confusion and growing alarm. I've always had it. My aunt gave it to me when I was little, sir. Are you okay? You look like you're about to." But Daniel was already pulling out his phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he needed. "Marcus, I need you to run a trace on someone. Now, tonight. I don't care what it costs." He looked back at Lauren, who was backing away from him with fear in her eyes. "Wait," he called out, his voice cracking. "Please, don't go." "What's your name?" "Lauren," she said automatically, then immediately regretted it. "Lauren Whitmore." "Lauren?" He repeated her name like it was a prayer. "My name is Daniel Kingsley. This book, do you know anything about its history? About where your aunt got it?" "No, Lauren's head was spinning. She just said it belonged to someone special. Someone who couldn't read it anymore. Look, I need to go. I'm sorry if this upset you, but please." Daniel stepped forward, still clutching the book. "I'll give you anything. Name your price. But I need to know where this came from." Lauren's eyes flashed with anger. "It's not for sale. That book is all I have left of. It's important to me, okay? You can't just buy people's memories because you're rich." She snatched the book back from his hands and clutched it against her chest like a shield. Something about his desperation, his assumption that everything had a price, reminded her painfully of why she'd been fired. Because people with money and power could destroy the lives of people like her on a whim. "Wait," Daniel called after her as she hurried away. "At least tell me how to reach you, please." But Lauren was already disappearing into the evening crowd, leaving Daniel standing alone on the sidewalk with his world turned upside down. For the first time in 23 years, he had hope. Real, tangible hope that his daughter might still be alive. He pulled out his phone again, his fingers flying over the screen. "Jennifer, cancel all my meetings for tomorrow. All my everything. And get me the best private investigator in the city. I don't care what it costs." As Lauren hurried through the streets, her heart hammering against her ribs, she couldn't shake the image of those green eyes filled with such desperate hope. She'd never seen anyone react to her book that way, as if it held the secrets of the universe. For the first time in years, fragments of dreams began surfacing in her mind. Dreams of a deep voice reading to her. Dreams of being called "my little star." Dreams of eyes the exact same shade of green as the stranger's. Dreams that felt less like dreams and more like memories. Lauren barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those desperate green eyes staring at her book, as if it held the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. She'd tossed and turned in her narrow bed, the encounter playing on repeat in her mind like a broken record. The morning sun streaming through her apartment's single window did nothing to ease the restless energy that had been building inside her since yesterday. She made coffee with shaking hands, her gaze continually drawn to the heart of the stars sitting on her tiny kitchen table. For the first time in years, she really looked at it, not just as the comfort object she'd carried everywhere, but as evidence of something she'd never questioned. The book was expensive. She realized now, the paper was thick, high quality. The binding was professional, not some cheap children's edition you'd find at a discount store. How had Aunt Irene, who'd raised her in a rundown apartment where they sometimes ate cereal for dinner because there wasn't money for groceries, come to possess such a beautiful book? The fragments of dreams from the night before drifted back to her. A man's voice, warm and deep, reading about the princess star who lost her way home. The scent of expensive cologne. Large hands turning pages while smaller ones reached up to touch the pictures. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The melody hummed itself in her mind, but not in her own voice, in a deeper one, rich with love and tenderness. Lauren shook her head hard, trying to dispel the strange sensations. She was being ridiculous. The encounter with that man, Daniel Kingsley, had obviously rattled her more than she'd realized. Rich people were used to getting what they wanted, and when she'd refused to sell her book, he'd probably made up some story about its importance to manipulate her. But those tears on his face had been real. The way his hands had trembled when he'd held the book. That kind of emotion couldn't be faked. By 10 o'clock, Lauren couldn't stand being alone with her thoughts any longer. She needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. The nursing home where Aunt Irene lived sat on the outskirts of the city, a sterile brick building that smelled of disinfectant and sadness. Lauren had been visiting twice a week for the past 3 years, ever since Irene's arthritis had become too severe for her to live alone. The woman who'd raised her deserved better than this place, but it was all Lauren could afford on a teacher's salary. Now she couldn't even afford that. Irene Morgan Castillo was sitting in her usual spot by the window, staring out at the small courtyard where a few residents sat in wheelchairs, soaking up the spring sunshine. At 78, she was still sharp mentally, though her body had betrayed her with painful joints and failing eyesight. "Lauren, sweetheart." Irene's face lit up when she saw her. "You're early today. Did you bring the book?" It was their tradition. Lauren would read The Heart of the Stars aloud during every visit, just as Irene had read it to her countless times during childhood. But today, Lauren had questions that couldn't wait. "Aunt Irene," she said, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside the bed, "I need to ask you about something, about my book." Something flickered across Irene's weathered face, so quickly that Lauren almost missed it. "What about it, dear? Where did it come from? I mean, really come from? You always said it belonged to someone special, but you never told me who." Irene's hands began fidgeting with the blanket covering her lap, a sure sign she was nervous. Why are you asking about this now, Lauren? That was so long ago. Please." Lauren reached out and covered one of Irene's hands with her own. "Something happened yesterday. A man saw the book and had a very strange reaction to it. He acted like he'd seen it before." The color drained from Irene's face. "What man? What did he look like?" "Tall, dark hair with some silver in it, green eyes." Lauren watched her aunt's expression carefully. "Very green eyes. He said his name was Daniel Kingsley." Irene's sharp intake of breath was audible across the small room. Her free hand moved to her chest, pressing against her heart as if trying to keep it from beating right out of her ribcage. "Aunt Irene, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I'm fine." But Irene's voice was shaky, uncertain. "Just tired. Perhaps you should come back another day." "No." Lauren's voice was firmer than she'd intended. "I've been having strange dreams. Strange memories that don't make sense. A mansion with huge windows and marble floors. A man's voice reading to me. The smell of expensive cologne. And that man yesterday, when he looked at me, I felt something, like I knew him." Irene closed her eyes, tears seeping from beneath her lids. "Lauren, some things are better left buried." "What things?" Lauren leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Aunt Irene, I'm 27 years old. Don't you think I have a right to know where I came from, who my parents were?" "Your parents are dead," Irene said quickly, too quickly. "I told you that car accident when you were 4. You came to live with me because there was nowhere else to go. Then why don't I remember them? Why don't I remember the accident? Why do I have dreams about places and people that supposedly never existed?" Irene was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "Please, Lauren, don't ask me these questions. I can't. I won't." "Can't what?" Lauren felt her frustration rising. "Aunt Irene, if there's something you're not telling me, I need to know, especially now, when my whole life is falling apart." "Falling apart? What do you mean?" Lauren told her about being fired, about the false accusations Monica had made, about having nowhere to turn and no one to help her. As she spoke, she watched her aunt's expression grow more troubled. "That poor man," Irene whispered when Lauren finished. "All these years, and he's still looking." "What poor man? Who's still looking?" Irene seemed to realize what she'd said. Her mouth snapped shut, and she turned away toward the window. No one. I'm confused. You know how I get sometimes. But Lauren wasn't buying it. She'd spent enough time with elderly residents to know the difference between genuine confusion and deliberate evasion. Aunt Irene, please, I'm begging you. If you know something about my past, about who I really am, I need to hear it. You're Lauren Carter Whitmore, Irene said firmly. You're my niece, my brother's daughter. You're a good girl who loves children and reads stories and carries that silly book everywhere. That's all you need to be. But it's not all I am, is it? Lauren pulled the book from her purse and set it on Irene's bedside table. This book is expensive, really expensive. How did the sister of a factory worker who died in a car accident come to own something like this? Irene stared at the book as if it were a snake coiled to strike. I saved up for it. For your birthday. My 4th birthday. You saved up hundreds of dollars for a 4-year-old's birthday present when we could barely afford groceries. Lauren, please stop. And why do I remember being called Luna? I used to tell you my name was Luna, and you'd get so upset. You'd say, no, sweetie, your name is Lauren. Over and over until I stopped arguing. Irene's face had gone completely white. You were confused. Children get confused after trauma. What trauma? The car accident I don't remember. The parents I can't picture. Lauren leaned closer. Or something else. Something you don't want me to remember. The silence stretched between them, heavy with secrets and half-truths. Outside the window, a group of children from a nearby school were playing in the courtyard, their laughter drifting through the glass like an echo from another life. Finally, Irene spoke, her voice barely a whisper. That man you met yesterday, Daniel Kingsley, did he seem kind? The question caught Lauren off guard. Kind? Yes, I suppose so. Desperate, but not cruel. Why? If he approaches you again? Irene said, still not looking at her. If he asks about the book or about your past. You need to be very careful. Careful. Why? Because some truths are more dangerous than lies. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Lauren felt a chill run down her spine. Aunt Irene, you're scaring me. Good. Irene finally turned to face her, and Lauren was shocked by the fear in her eyes. Maybe a little fear will keep you safe. Safe from what? But Irene had turned away again, her jaw set in the stubborn line Lauren remembered from childhood, the expression that meant the conversation was over, no matter how much Lauren pleaded or argued. As Lauren left the nursing home that afternoon, her mind was spinning with more questions than answers. The drive back to her apartment was a blur of half-formed thoughts and growing suspicions. Everything Aunt Irene had told her about her past was starting to unravel, like pulling a loose thread from a sweater. That night, she sat on her bed with the Heart of the Stars open in her lap, studying every page with new eyes. On the inside back cover, in faded pencil, she found something she'd somehow missed all these years. A child's drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands under a sky full of stars. At the bottom, in shaky crayon letters, someone had written, Luna plus Daddy, her hands trembling. Lauren traced the childish letters with her finger. Luna, the name that had felt so natural on her tongue as a child, before Aunt Irene had trained her out of it. And for the first time in her life, Lauren began to wonder if the woman who'd raised her had been telling the truth about anything at all. Daniel hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night pacing his penthouse, clutching his phone and waiting for Marcus Chen, the best private investigator money could buy, to call him back. When the phone finally rang at 6:47 a.m., Daniel answered before the first ring finished. Tell me you found something. Marcus's voice was crisp, professional. I found everything, Mr. Kingsley. You're going to want to sit down for this. Daniel was already moving toward his home office, his heart hammering against his ribs. Just tell me. Lauren Carter Whitmore, age 27, born according to her birth certificate in Toledo, Ohio. Raised by Irene Morgan Castillo, allegedly her aunt, no record of parents Michael and Sarah Whitmore dying in any car accident in Ohio, Illinois, or any surrounding state. Daniel's knees gave out, and he collapsed into his desk chair. Go on. Here's where it gets interesting. Irene Morgan Castillo. That's not her real name. Her real name is Rosemary Bennett Langford. She worked for a family in Lake Forest from 1998 to 2002 as a live-in nanny and housekeeper. The air left Daniel's lungs in a rush. What family? "The Kingsley family, she was your daughter's nanny, Mr. Kingsley." The phone slipped from Daniel's fingers, clattering to the floor. His entire body had gone numb, as if someone had injected ice water directly into his veins. Rosemary. How had he not recognized her name when Lauren mentioned her Aunt Irene? But then again, she'd always gone by her middle name, Rosemary Bennett. He'd never known her full legal name. He picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Are you absolutely certain? I have her employment records, tax documents, everything. She lived in your carriage house for 4 years. The employment ended abruptly on September 15th, 2002, the same day your daughter disappeared. September 15th, the worst day of Daniel's life, burned into his memory like a brand. He'd been in meetings all morning, then rushed home when Elizabeth called, hysterical, saying Luna was gone. The police, the FBI, the media circus that followed. It had all been a nightmare that lasted months and never really ended. "There's more," Marcus continued. "I tracked down Rosemary's rental history. 3 days after Luna's disappearance, she rented a small apartment in Youngstown, Ohio, under the name Irene Morgan. She listed a 4-year-old niece as a dependent, a niece named Lauren." Daniel closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back in that nightmare September evening, standing in Luna's empty bedroom while police officers asked him the same questions over and over. Had there been any threats? Any suspicious activity? Any reason someone might target his family? He'd told them about the household staff, including Rosemary, but she'd been eliminated as a suspect almost immediately. She'd worked for them for 4 years without incident. She'd loved Luna like her own child. Everyone could see that. Besides, she'd disappeared too, the police had said, probably scared off by all the media attention. "Mr. Kingsley, are you still there? I need you to find out everything about that day," Daniel said, his voice barely recognizable even to himself. "Everything about what happened, what she was doing, why she left. And I need you to find Rosemary Bennett Langford now." "I already did. She's in Sunset Manor Nursing Home on the south side. Been there about 3 years. Daniel was already reaching for his car keys. "Text me the address." "Sir, maybe you should think about this." "Text me the address, Marcus." The drive to the nursing home was the longest 23 minutes of Daniel's life. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every traffic jam was a personal affront from the universe. By the time he pulled into the parking lot, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn off the engine. Sunset Manor was exactly what he'd expected. A cheerful facade hiding the institutional sadness of people waiting to die. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, looked up as he approached. "I'm here to see Irene Morgan," he said, then corrected himself. "Rosemary Bennett." The woman frowned. "I'm sorry, sir, but visiting hours don't start until..." Daniel placed a credit card on the counter. "I'd like to make a donation to the facility. Perhaps we could discuss it in private." 20 minutes and a $5,000 donation later. Daniel was walking down a sterile hallway toward room 217, his heart threatening to beat right out of his chest. He'd planned what he would say, how he would control his anger, how he would get the answers he needed without alerting anyone that something was wrong. But when he saw her sitting by the window, looking exactly the same, except for the gray hair and the lines around her eyes, every rational thought fled his mind. "Hello, Rosemary." She turned toward him, and the color drained from her face so quickly he thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. "Mr. Kingsley," her voice was a whisper. "How did you... Why are you... Where is my daughter?" The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Rosemary's hands began trembling, and she looked around the room as if searching for an escape route. "I don't know what you mean. I don't have any children. I never..." "Stop." Daniel's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 23 years of grief. "I know about Lauren. I know you took her. I know you've been raising her as your niece for 23 years. What I don't know is why." Rosemary began to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. "I never meant for it to happen like this. I never meant to keep her. It was just supposed to be for a few hours, just to teach you both a lesson about leaving her alone." The admission hit Daniel like a physical blow. "You took her to teach us a lesson." She was crying. Rosemary's voice cracked with emotion. "I came to work that morning, and she was sitting in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, crying for her mama. Mrs. Kingsley had left her alone again. Went out for one of her drives that lasted all day. Luna was scared and hungry and asking where everyone was. Daniel's mind raced back to that morning. He'd left early for a breakfast meeting. Elizabeth had been in one of her dark moods the night before, drinking too much wine and talking about how trapped she felt, how motherhood wasn't what she'd expected. He'd assumed she'd be fine by morning, that she'd take care of Luna like always. I was so angry, Rosemary continued. You worked all the time, never home. She drank and ignored that beautiful little girl. I thought if Luna was gone for a few hours, if you came home and couldn't find her, maybe you'd realize what you had. So you took her. I took her to the park. We played on the swings, fed the ducks. She was so happy. Mr. Kingsley, she kept asking if we could stay forever, just the two of us. And when it was time to bring her home, Rosemary's voice broke completely. There were police cars everywhere, news vans. I saw you on the front lawn, crying, and I realized what I'd done, how it looked. I panicked. Daniel felt like he was drowning. You let me think she was dead. You let me search for 23 years, thinking someone had taken her, hurt her, killed her. I tried to bring her back. I drove by the house dozens of times those first few weeks, but there were always reporters, always police, and Luna. She was so confused. She kept asking for her daddy, but she was also attached to me. I'd been more of a mother to her than Elizabeth ever was. The truth of that statement was like a knife to Daniel's heart. Elizabeth had struggled with motherhood from the beginning, suffering from what would probably be diagnosed today as postpartum depression. She'd loved Luna, but in an abstract way, like loving a beautiful painting you could only admire from a distance. So you decided to keep her. I decided to protect her. I changed our names, moved to Ohio, created a life where she could be safe and loved and cared for. I gave her everything I could. Everything except her real father. The shout echoed through the small room. Daniel was on his feet now, his carefully controlled facade cracking under the weight of 23 years of anguish. Every night, he whispered, his voice breaking. Every single night for 23 years. I've read her favorite book to an empty room. I've kept her bedroom exactly the same. I've funded missing children organizations, hired investigators, followed up on every possible lead. I've lived in hell, Rosemary, because I thought my baby was gone forever. She wasn't gone, Rosemary said quietly. She was loved. She was safe. She was happy. She was stolen. The word hung between them like a verdict. Rosemary buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from 23 years of buried guilt. I know, she whispered. God help me. I know what I did, and I've regretted it every single day since. But I also saved her, Mr. Kingsley. Elizabeth was getting worse. Drinking more, you were never home. What kind of life would Luna have had? Daniel stared at her. This woman who had been part of his household for 4 years, who had helped raise his daughter, who had destroyed his life with the best of intentions. The worst part was that some of what she said was true. He had worked too much. Elizabeth had been struggling, but that didn't give her the right to make decisions about his child's future. Where is she now? He asked finally. She lost her job yesterday. False accusations from a jealous supervisor. She's probably at her apartment trying to figure out what to do next. Rosemary looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. She's a teacher, Mr. Kingsley. She works with children because she has so much love to give. She's everything you and Elizabeth could have hoped for her to become. I want her address. I can't. You can, and you will. You owe me that much. Rosemary stared at him for a long moment, then slowly reached for a piece of paper from her bedside table. With shaking hands, she wrote down an address on the north side of the city. Please, she whispered as she handed it to him. Please don't tell her the truth all at once. She thinks I'm all the family she has left. It will destroy her. Daniel took the paper without looking at it. You should have thought about that 23 years ago. As he walked toward the door, Rosemary called after him. Mr. Kingsley, she still reads that book every night. The Heart of the Stars. She carries it everywhere, just like she did when she was little. Some part of her has always known she belonged somewhere else. Daniel paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame when he spoke. His voice was hollow. You're wrong about one thing, Rosemary. She didn't belong somewhere else. She belonged with me. Daniel sat in his car outside Lauren's apartment building for 2 hours, staring up at the third-floor window where a single lamp glowed behind thin curtains. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white, and he'd started the engine at least a dozen times, only to turn it off again without moving. What did you say to a daughter who didn't know she was your daughter? How did you explain 23 years of separation? How did you tell someone that their entire life had been built on a lie? The address Rosemary had given him led to a modest brick building in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The kind of place where young teachers and social workers lived because it was all they could afford. The contrast between this humble apartment and the mansion where Luna should have grown up wasn't lost on him. Through Marcus's continued investigation, Daniel had learned more about Lauren's life, her struggles to pay for college, working 3 jobs to help support Rosemary when her arthritis got worse, her dedication to children who came from broken homes. She'd grown up poor but rich in love, at least according to the neighbors Marcus had interviewed. She's got a heart bigger than Texas, one elderly woman had said, always helping folks in the building, bringing soup when someone's sick, reading to the kids in the courtyard. That girl's an angel if I ever saw one. An angel raised by a woman who'd stolen her from her real family. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Found something else. Elizabeth's medical records from 2002. You need to see this. The attachment that followed made Daniel's blood run cold. Elizabeth's psychiatrist had been recommending intensive therapy and medication for severe postpartum depression. There were notes about her increasing alcohol consumption, her inability to bond with Luna, her episodes of leaving the house for hours without telling anyone where she was going. The worst entry was dated September 14th, 2002, the day before Luna disappeared. Patient expressed feelings of being trapped by motherhood, made concerning statements about wanting to disappear and start over. Immediate intervention recommended. Daniel closed his eyes, remembering Elizabeth's behavior those last few weeks. The way she'd stare at Luna sometimes with a mixture of love and resentment. The mornings he'd come downstairs to find Luna eating cereal alone while Elizabeth slept off another hangover. The arguments they'd had about her drinking, her absence, her seeming inability to connect with their daughter. Had Rosemary seen something that morning that convinced her Luna was in real danger? Had Elizabeth said something, done something, that made the nanny believe she was saving Luna's life rather than destroying Daniel's? His phone rang, jolting him from his dark thoughts. Marcus, I'm at your office with a box of documents you need to see. Elizabeth's papers, medical records, and something else, a letter. What kind of letter? One she wrote to you before she died. Your lawyer's been sitting on it for 15 years. Daniel's hands started shaking again. Elizabeth had died 3 years after Luna's disappearance, her grief and guilt finally consuming her completely. The official cause was heart failure, but Daniel had always known she'd died of a broken heart. The same thing that was slowly killing him. Bring everything to my apartment. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He took one last look up at Lauren's window, at the daughter who didn't know he existed, then drove away into the night. Marcus was waiting in Daniel's penthouse with a banker's box and a grave expression. You're not going to like what's in here. I haven't liked anything about the last 24 hours. Show me. The letter was in Elizabeth's handwriting, her elegant script shaky with emotion and whatever medication she'd been taking at the time. Daniel's hands trembled as he unfolded the pages. My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, then I'm finally free from the guilt that's been eating me alive for 3 years. By now you probably know the truth about Luna, about what really happened that morning. I pray that you've found her, that she's safe and loved and everything we failed to give her. I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. That morning, I was having what Dr. Morrison called an episode. I couldn't get out of bed, couldn't stop crying, couldn't bear the thought of pretending to be a good mother for one more day. I left Luna in the kitchen with her cereal and told myself I was just going for a drive to clear my head. But I didn't come back, Daniel. I drove for hours, thinking about how different my life would have been if I'd never gotten pregnant, if I'd never had to pretend to be maternal when every fiber of my being felt like it was screaming. I know how that sounds. I know what kind of monster it makes me. When I finally came home and found the police cars, found you crying on the lawn, I knew it was my fault. If I hadn't left her alone, if I'd been the mother she deserved, none of this would have happened. Rosemary wouldn't have felt compelled to take her. Luna would be safe at home where she belonged. I tried to tell you the truth so many times. I wrote you letters I never sent, started conversations I couldn't finish. How do you tell the man you love that your selfishness led to your daughter's disappearance? How do you admit that maybe, just maybe, our baby girl is better off wherever she is than she was with a mother who couldn't love her the way she deserved? The guilt is killing me, Daniel. Literally killing me. My heart can't take the weight of what I've done. Dr. Morrison says I'm having panic attacks, but I know the truth. This is punishment for being a terrible mother, a terrible wife, a terrible human being. If you find Luna, when you find her, please don't tell her about me. Let her remember the few good moments we had, if there were any. Let her think her mama loved her completely and unconditionally, the way she deserved. Don't let my failures poison whatever relationship you might be able to build with her. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm sorry for everything I couldn't be, everything I couldn't give you, everything I took away. Find our little star and give her all the love I was too broken to provide. Forever yours, Elizabeth P.A.'s. I hid this letter because I was too much of a coward to face your reaction. I've instructed Charles to give it to you only after my death, when it can't hurt anyone but me anymore. Daniel read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Elizabeth had known. She'd known that her abandonment of Luna that morning had led directly to their daughter's disappearance, and she'd carried that guilt to her grave. Your lawyer kept this from you for 15 years, Marcus said quietly. Said Elizabeth made him promise not to give it to you unless you'd found Luna or given up looking. He was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? The truth. From knowing that your wife blamed herself for something that wasn't entirely her fault. She was sick, Mr. Kingsley. Really sick. The kind of sick that makes people do things they'd never do otherwise. Daniel set the letter down with shaking hands. She was right about one thing. If she hadn't left Luna alone that morning, none of this would have happened. And if Rosemary hadn't panicked and run, Luna would have been home by dinner time. There's enough blame to go around. Daniel walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, his daughter was probably getting ready for bed, maybe reading The Heart of the Stars. One more time before sleep. She had no idea that her world was about to change forever. What's the plan? Marcus asked. How do you want to approach her? I don't know. Daniel's voice was hollow. How do you tell someone that everything they believe about their life is a lie? How do you explain that the woman who raised them is a kidnapper, even if she was trying to protect them? Maybe you start with the truth, that you've been looking for her every day for 23 years, that you never stopped believing she was alive. And then what? She comes to live in my mansion and we pretend to be a happy family. She's 27 years old, Marcus. She has her own life, her own relationships, her own dreams. I'm a stranger to her. You're her father. Biology doesn't make someone a father. Love does. Care does. Being there does. Daniel's voice cracked. Rosemary was more of a parent to her than I ever was. That's not your fault, isn't it? Daniel turned away from the window. Elizabeth was sick, and I was too busy building my empire to notice, too focused on providing for my family to actually be present for them. If I'd paid attention, if I'd gotten Elizabeth the help she needed earlier, if I'd been home more. You can't change the past. No, but I can try not to make the same mistakes with the future. Daniel looked at the banker's box full of evidence, the proof of 23 years of loss and pain and misunderstanding. I need to think about this, really think about what's best for her. Not just what I want. What do you want? I want my little girl back. I want to read her bedtime stories and teach her to ride a bike and walk her down the aisle at her wedding. I want all the moments I missed, all the conversations we never had, all the hugs and tears and laughter that got stolen from us. Daniel's voice broke completely. But she's not a little girl anymore. She's a woman who's built a life without me. Maybe the kindest thing I can do is let her keep living it. Or maybe, Marcus said gently, the kindest thing you can do is give her the choice. Tell her the truth and let her decide what she wants to do with it. Outside the windows, the city glittered like a constellation of earthbound stars. Daniel thought about Luna, Lauren, lying in her modest bed, clutching the book that had connected them across 23 years of separation. Did she dream about him the way he dreamed about her? Did some part of her heart know it belonged somewhere else? Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to shatter her world or continue living in the ruins of his own. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. In his pocket, His phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. "Sir, there's one more thing. Lauren's been trying to reach Rosemary all day, but the nursing home says she's refusing visitors. I think she told Lauren something that spooked her." Daniel closed his eyes. Time was running out. If Rosemary cracked under the pressure and told Lauren the truth herself, it would be even more devastating than hearing it from him. Some secrets, once exposed to the light, could never be buried again. The truth was coming. Whether he was ready for it or not, Lauren stared at the DNA test kit sitting on her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she read the instructions for the third time. After another sleepless night filled with fragmented dreams and Aunt Irene's cryptic warnings, she'd made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The man from yesterday, Daniel Kingsley, had left his business card at the front desk of her building that morning, along with a note written in careful handwriting. "If you want answers about your book, about your past, I'm willing to share what I know. No strings attached, just truth." At the bottom, he'd written his personal cell phone number and added, "I understand if you don't trust me, if you'd prefer, we can meet at a public place with witnesses, or you can have your DNA tested independently. I'll do the same. Whatever makes you feel safe." The fact that he'd suggested DNA testing had sent her world spinning. People didn't suggest genetic testing unless they believed there was a biological connection, unless they thought, no, it was impossible, wasn't it? But the dreams were getting stronger, more vivid. Last night, she dreamed of sitting in a high chair while someone with large, gentle hands fed her applesauce. She dreamed of a woman with sad eyes and the smell of wine on her breath, reaching out to touch her face before pulling away as if burned. She dreamed of a man's voice singing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," while reading from the exact book she carried everywhere, the same book that had made a stranger cry in the middle of a busy street. Lauren picked up her phone and dialed the number he'd written. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. Lauren. The sound of her name and his voice sent an electric shock through her system. There was something familiar about the way he said it, something that made her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. "I want to meet," she said before she could change her mind. "Somewhere public, somewhere safe. Of course, wherever you're comfortable. Lincoln Park Zoo, by the Lion House, 2 o'clock. There was a pause. "The zoo where..." "That's perfect, I'll be there. Mr. Kingsley, bring your DNA kit too. If we're going to do this, let's do it right." The zoo was crowded with families enjoying the warm spring afternoon. Lauren arrived early and positioned herself where she could see the Lion House entrance from multiple angles. She wasn't sure what she was afraid of. This was a public place in broad daylight, but Aunt Irene's warnings about dangerous truths kept echoing in her mind. She spotted Daniel before he saw her. He was walking slowly, scanning the crowd, and she noticed he looked like he'd aged years since their encounter yesterday. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his normally perfect hair disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. When their eyes met across the crowd, they both froze. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they simply stared at each other. Lauren felt that strange recognition again, stronger this time, the sense that she was looking at someone important, someone who mattered in ways she couldn't understand. "Lauren," he approached slowly, carefully, as if she might bolt at any sudden movement. "Thank you for coming. I need to know the truth," she said without preamble. "About the book, about why you reacted the way you did, about what you think you know about my past." Daniel nodded and pulled a manila envelope from his jacket. "I brought copies of everything. Medical records, police reports, photographs. But before I show you any of it, I need you to understand something." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Whatever we discover today is going to change your life forever. Once you know, you can't unknow. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" Lauren thought of Aunt Irene's tears, of the lies she'd detected in every conversation about her childhood, of the dreams that felt more like memories with each passing day. "I'm certain." They found a bench in a quiet area near the pond, away from the main crowd but still visible to passers-by. Daniel opened the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out a photograph, a professional portrait of a family. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. The man in the photograph was Daniel, 20 years younger but unmistakably him. Beside him stood a beautiful woman with blonde hair and sad blue eyes, and between them, Sitting on the woman's lap with a huge smile and golden curls was a little girl who looked exactly like Lauren had at that age. Exactly like her. Her name was Luna, Daniel said quietly. Luna Kingsley. She disappeared on September 15th, 2002 when she was 4 years old. She was my daughter. Lauren stared at the photograph, her mind reeling. The little girl was wearing the same yellow dress Lauren remembered from her own childhood. The one Aunt Irene had always said was her favorite. The same dress she'd seen in her dreams. "That's impossible," she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. Daniel pulled out another photograph, a close-up of the little girl holding a book, The Heart of the Stars. Even in the slightly blurry image, Lauren could see the small tear in the bottom corner of the cover. The same tear that marked her own book. This was taken the day before she disappeared, Daniel said. Luna carried that book everywhere. It was her most treasured possession. Lauren's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the photograph. "You think I'm her? You think I'm your daughter? I don't think it. I know it." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. "I've known since the moment I saw you with that book. But I needed proof. I needed to be sure." He pulled out the DNA kit. "This will tell us for certain. But Lauren, even before we test this, I need you to know something else. The woman who raised you, Irene Morgan, or Rosemary Bennett as she was really called, she worked for my family. She was Luna's nanny." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Lauren felt like she was falling, even though she was sitting perfectly still. "You're saying Aunt Irene kidnapped me. I'm saying she took you from our home the morning you disappeared and never brought you back. Whether that makes her a kidnapper or..." Daniel paused, clearly struggling with his own emotions. "It's complicated." Lauren stood up abruptly, pacing away from the bench before turning back to face him. "This is insane. You're insane. Aunt Irene raised me. She loved me. She sacrificed everything for me. I know, and I believe she did love you. But she also stole 23 years of my life. 23 years of being your father. You're not my father." The words came out as a shout, causing several nearby families to look in their direction. Lauren lowered her voice, but the intensity remained. "My father died in a car accident when I was 4. My mother, too, Aunt Irene told me. Aunt Irene lied." Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. "There was no car accident, no dead parents named Whitmore. You were taken from your home, from your real family, and hidden away for over 2 decades. Lauren felt like she couldn't breathe. The logical part of her mind was screaming that this was impossible. That people didn't just steal children and raise them as their own, but the evidence was right there in front of her. Photographs that could have been taken of her yesterday, a book that was unmistakably hers, and dreams that suddenly made terrible sense. "The woman in the photo," she said finally. My mother." Daniel's face crumpled with grief. "Elizabeth. She died 3 years after you disappeared. The guilt and grief, it killed her. She's dead. I'm so sorry, I know this is overwhelming." Lauren sank back onto the bench, her legs no longer able to support her. "So I'm an orphan after all. Just not the way I thought." "You're not an orphan." Daniel moved closer, his voice urgent. "I'm here. I've been looking for you every single day for 23 years. I never stopped believing you were alive." The DNA kit sat between them on the bench, waiting to confirm what they both already knew in their hearts. Lauren stared at it, understanding that opening it would be crossing a line she could never uncross. "What happens if it's positive?" she asked. "What happens if I really am Luna Kingsley? Then you get to decide what comes next. I won't force anything on you. I won't expect you to suddenly call me dad or move into my house or pretend we have a relationship we don't have. You're an adult with your own life. But you want those things." Daniel's voice broke. "I want my little girl back. But she's gone, isn't she? She grew up without me. You're Lauren now, not Luna. I have to accept that. I keep having dreams," Lauren said quietly. "Dreams about a man reading to me, about a big house with marble floors, about being called Little Star. I always thought they were just dreams. I read to you every night. Your favorite story was about the Princess Star who got lost and had to find her way home." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I still read it aloud sometimes. In your old room. I know it sounds crazy, but I kept hoping somehow you'd hear me. Lauren reached for the DNA kit with trembling fingers. How long for results? 48 hours for the rush processing? She tore open the package and read the instructions, 2 simple cheek swabs, 1 for each of them, were 2 little pieces of plastic that would either confirm the most impossible story she'd ever heard, or prove that Daniel Kingsley was a delusional man with too much money and too much grief. Together, she asked. They swabbed their cheeks in silence, sealed the samples in the provided containers, and filled out the paperwork. Daniel had already arranged for a courier to pick up the samples and rush them to the lab. As they waited for the courier, they sat in silence, watching families walk by with their children. A little girl with golden curls ran past, laughing as her father chased her, and Lauren saw Daniel flinch as if he'd been struck. 23 years, he said quietly. 23 years, Lauren agreed. When the courier arrived and took the samples, Lauren felt like she was watching her old life disappear forever, in 48 hours. She would either be Lauren Carter Whitmore, orphan teacher who'd gotten caught up in a stranger's delusion, or Luna Kingsley, kidnapped heiress who'd spent her entire adult life living a lie. "Where do I reach you?" Daniel asked as they prepared to part ways. Lauren gave him her phone number, then hesitated. What if it's positive? What if I really am her? Then we figure it out together, one day at a time. As Lauren walked away, she could feel Daniel watching her go. She didn't turn around, but somehow she knew he was still standing there, probably wondering if he'd just found his daughter or lost his mind completely. 2 days, she thought. In 2 days, everything would change. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday morning that would forever divide Lauren's life into before and after. The courier knocked on her apartment door at exactly 9:00 a.m., carrying an envelope that contained either confirmation of the most extraordinary story ever told, or proof that grief could drive even wealthy men to delusion. Lauren's hands shook as she signed for the package. She'd barely slept in 48 hours. Surviving on coffee and anxiety while her mind spun through every possible scenario, part of her hoped the test would be negative, that she could return to her simple life as Lauren Whitmore, unemployed teacher with a mysterious past. The other part of her, the part that had been growing stronger with each passing hour, hoped for something she was afraid to name. She set the envelope on her kitchen table and stared at it for 20 minutes before finding the courage to call Daniel. "The results are here," she said, when he answered on the first ring. "Do you want to open them together?" "Yes, but not over the phone. Can you come here? I'm already in your parking lot." Lauren looked out her window and saw a black sedan parked below. Daniel was leaning against it, phone pressed to his ear, looking up at her building with the same desperate hope she'd seen at the zoo. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. She hung up and spent the next 5 minutes pacing her tiny living room, trying to prepare herself for whatever came next. When the knock came, she opened the door to find Daniel standing in the hallway, looking as terrified as she felt. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. He entered her small apartment, his eyes taking in the modest furnishings. The books stacked everywhere, the children's artwork taped to the refrigerator, gifts from students over the years. His gaze lingered on a framed photo of Lauren and Aunt Irene from last Christmas, both of them smiling at the camera. "She looks happy," he said quietly. "She raised me well," Lauren replied, then immediately regretted the defensive edge in her voice. They sat at her kitchen table with the envelope between them, neither reaching for it. "What if it's positive?" Lauren asked. "Then we deal with whatever comes next." "What if it's negative?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Then I apologize for turning your life upside down and continue searching for my daughter." Lauren picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. Together. She tore it open and pulled out the official document. The scientific jargon filled most of the page, but the conclusion was written in bold letters at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. The paper fluttered from Lauren's fingers to the table. For a moment, neither of them moved or spoke. Then Daniel made a sound somewhere between a sob and a prayer, and Lauren felt her entire world shift on its axis. "Luna," he whispered, reaching toward her face before stopping himself. "My little Luna." "I'm not Luna," she said automatically, even as tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm Lauren. I've been Lauren for 23 years. I know. I'm sorry. I know you're Lauren now." They sat in silence, the weight of confirmed truth settling around them like dust after an explosion. 23 years of lies, of searching, of grief and love and loss, reduced to a single sheet of paper with a percentage that changed everything. "I need to see her," Lauren said finally. "I need to see Aunt Irene. I need to hear the truth from her." Daniel nodded. "I'll drive you." The trip to Sunset Manor passed in heavy silence. Lauren stared out the window, watching Chicago blur past, trying to reconcile the life she'd known with the truth she'd just learned. Every memory felt different now, tainted with the knowledge that it was built on deception. When they arrived at the nursing home, Lauren was surprised to find Aunt Irene sitting in the lobby rather than in her room. She looked small and frail in the overstuffed chair, her arthritis-gnarled hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the entrance as if she'd been waiting. When she saw Lauren and Daniel walking toward her together, her face crumpled with the weight of 23 years of secrets finally coming to light. "I wondered when this day would come," she said quietly. Lauren sat in the chair across from her, while Daniel remained standing, his presence a silent testament to the truth they could no longer avoid. "Tell me," Lauren said. "Tell me everything, the real story this time." Rosemary, Lauren still couldn't think of her as anyone else, looked between them with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Your mother was having a bad day," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "One of her worst days. She'd been drinking the night before, and when I came to work that morning, you were sitting in the kitchen in your pajamas, crying. She'd left you alone again." Lauren's chest tightened. "She abandoned me. She was sick. Sweetheart, really sick. The kind of sick that makes people do things they'd never do otherwise. But that morning, when I found you alone and scared, asking where your mama was, I got so angry." Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "So you decided to take her. I decided to teach you both a lesson," Rosemary said, looking directly at him. "You were never home. Always working, always traveling, always putting business before your family, and Elizabeth was getting worse every day. I thought if you came home and Luna was gone, if you were scared for a few hours, maybe you'd realize what you had." "A few hours," Daniel repeated, his voice hollow. "That's all it was supposed to be. We went to the park, played on the swings, fed the ducks. You were so happy, Luna. You kept asking if we could stay at the park forever, just the two of us. And when it was time to go home," Rosemary's voice broke completely. "There were police cars everywhere. News vans, reporters. I saw your father on the front lawn, crying, and I realized what I'd done, how it looked. Lauren felt like she was drowning. So you ran. I panicked. I drove around for hours, thinking about what to do. You fell asleep in the car and you looked so peaceful. You'd been so happy all day, happier than I'd seen you in weeks. Elizabeth had been so distant with you lately, so cold, and your father was never there. That didn't give you the right," Daniel started. "I know." Rosemary's voice cracked with anguish. "I know what I did was wrong, but I also knew that little girl needed someone to love her, really love her, and I could do that. I could give her everything she needed, everything except her real father," Daniel said quietly. "You weren't being a real father," Rosemary shot back, then immediately looked stricken. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did, and maybe you're right." Daniel's voice was hollow. "Maybe I wasn't the father she deserved. Maybe I was too focused on work, too absent, too willing to let other people raise my child while I built my empire." Lauren looked between them, seeing the pain and regret on both their faces. "What happened after you ran? I drove to Ohio. I had a little money saved, and I found a cheap apartment. I told the landlord you were my niece, that your parents had died in an accident. The story just evolved from there. But why didn't you bring me back later when things calmed down?" Rosemary's hands twisted in her lap. "I tried. I drove past your house dozens of times those first few months, but there were always reporters, always police. And you were adjusting to life with me. You started calling me Aunt Irene. You seemed happy. She was 4 years old," Daniel said. "Children adapt because they have to. That doesn't mean she was better off, wasn't she?" Rosemary looked directly at him. "Your wife died 3 years later from the guilt and grief. You became a workaholic who buried himself in business to avoid dealing with the pain. What kind of life would Luna have had if I'd brought her back to that?" The words hit Daniel like physical blows. He sank into a nearby chair, his face pale. "You don't know that," he whispered. "If she'd come home, maybe Elizabeth would have gotten better. Maybe I would have changed, been the father she needed." "Maybe," Rosemary agreed, "but I couldn't take that risk. I'd already fallen in love with her. She was the child I'd never been able to have, and I was the mother she needed. We made a family together." Lauren felt torn between rage and gratitude. This woman had stolen her from her real father, had built her entire life on a lie, but she'd also loved her unconditionally, had sacrificed everything to give her a good life, had been the only mother she'd ever really known. "I have letters," Rosemary said suddenly. "Letters I wrote to you, Daniel, but never sent. Hundreds of them, explaining, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. They're in a box in my room. Why didn't you send them? Because I was a coward. Because I knew that the moment I did, I'd lose her forever. And I couldn't bear that." Daniel looked at Lauren, his green eyes, so like her own, filled with a pain that seemed bottomless. "I read to an empty room for 23 years. Every night, I read the heart of the stars to a daughter who wasn't there." "I know," Rosemary whispered. "She told me. She said she remembered a man's voice reading to her. And it broke my heart every time." "You remembered?" Daniel looked at Lauren with wonder. "Pieces, fragments. I always thought they were just dreams." Lauren's voice was thick with tears. "I used to have nightmares about losing someone important, about being taken away from somewhere I belonged. You told me they were just bad dreams from the trauma of losing my parents." "I'm so sorry," Rosemary said. "I'm sorry for all of it. I'm sorry for the lies, for the pain I caused, for the years you lost together. But I'm not sorry for loving you. I'm not sorry for giving you the best life I could." Lauren stood up abruptly, needing space to breathe, to think, to process the magnitude of what she'd learned. "I need some air." She walked to the courtyard, leaving Daniel and Rosemary alone with their shared guilt and grief. Outside, she sat on a bench among the flowering trees and tried to figure out how to rebuild a life that had just been revealed as an elaborate fiction behind her through the window. She could see the two people who'd shaped her existence, the father who'd lost her and the woman who'd stolen her, both of them broken by love, both of them carrying guilt that had poisoned 23 years of their lives, and now it was her turn to decide what came next. 3 weeks had passed since the DNA results confirmed what Lauren's heart had somehow always known. 3 weeks of tentative phone calls, awkward coffee meetings, and the strange process of getting to know a father who was simultaneously a stranger and the most familiar person in the world. Lauren sat in Dr. Patricia Hamilton's office, a neutral space where she and Daniel had agreed to meet for family counseling. The therapist had specialized in reunification cases for over 20 years, and her calm presence had become an anchor in the storm of emotions that had consumed Lauren's life. "How are you feeling about today's session?" Dr. Hamilton asked, as Lauren settled into her usual chair. "Nervous, hopeful, confused." Lauren managed a weak smile. The usual cocktail of emotions. Daniel arrived precisely on time, as he always did. Over the past few weeks, Lauren had learned that her father was a man of rigid habits and careful control, traits that she recognized in herself. He brought coffee for both of them, remembering that she preferred vanilla lattes, a small gesture that meant more than he probably realized. "Good afternoon, Lauren, Dr. Hamilton." He took his seat, maintaining the careful distance they'd established, close enough to talk, far enough to avoid overwhelming either of them. "I thought we might start today by talking about the positive discoveries you've both made, Doctor," Hamilton said. "What similarities have you noticed?" Lauren and Daniel exchanged glances. Over the past weeks, the parallels between them had been startling and somehow comforting. "We both hate horror movies," Lauren said with a small laugh. "Last week we discovered we both turn the channel whenever anything scary comes on, and we both rearrange our bookshelves by color rather than alphabetically," Daniel added. "Apparently it drives our friends crazy. You both have the same nervous habit of humming when you're thinking," Dr. Hamilton observed. "I've noticed it during our sessions." Lauren touched her throat self-consciously. "I didn't realize I did that. Luna used to hum constantly when she was little," Daniel said softly. "Elizabeth used to say she sounded like a little bird." The mention of Elizabeth still brought a complex mix of emotions. Through their sessions, Lauren had learned about her mother's struggles with depression, her battle with alcohol, and the guilt that had ultimately killed her. It was hard to mourn a mother she couldn't remember while simultaneously trying to understand why she'd been abandoned. "There's something else," Daniel said hesitantly. "Something I discovered this week that I wanted to share." He pulled out a manila folder. "I've been going through Elizabeth's things, trying to understand what happened better. I found these." The folder contained dozens of photographs Lauren had never seen. Pictures of herself as a baby and toddler with a beautiful blonde woman who looked at the camera with sad eyes but gazed at Lauren with unmistakable love. "She did love you," Daniel said quietly. "Whatever else happened, whatever mistakes she made, Elizabeth loved you deeply. Her illness just made it impossible for her to show it consistently." Lauren studied the photographs, seeing herself in her mother's arms, on her mother's lap, both of them smiling in moments that must have been rare. In one picture, Elizabeth was reading "The Heart of the Stars" to a tiny Lauren, both of their faces illuminated by the soft light of what must have been bedtime. "I remember this," Lauren whispered, touching the photograph. Not the specific moment, but the feeling of it, being safe and loved and hearing her voice. "She read to you every night when she was well," Daniel said. "It was one of the few things that seemed to bring her peace." Dr. Hamilton leaned forward. "How does it feel to learn this about your mother, Lauren?" "Complicated. I'm angry that she left me alone that morning, but I also feel sorry for her. She was sick, and she didn't have the help she needed." Lauren looked at Daniel. "I'm angry at you too, for working so much that you missed what was happening at home." Daniel flinched but nodded. "You have every right to be angry. I failed both of you. But I'm also grateful," Lauren continued, "because even though everything went wrong, I ended up with people who loved me. Aunt Irene, Rosemary. She may have made terrible choices, but she gave me a good life. And you never stopped looking for me." "Never," Daniel said firmly. "Even when everyone else said I should give up, when the police closed the case, when the lawyers told me to accept that you were gone, I couldn't. What kept you going?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Hope and guilt. I knew that if I'd been a better father, if I'd paid more attention, none of it would have happened. Searching for you was my penance, but it was also my prayer." Their progress had been slow but steady. They'd started with supervised visits in Dr. Hamilton's office, then graduated to coffee dates and walks in the park. Last week, Daniel had shown Lauren his penthouse, including the bedroom he'd preserved exactly as Luna had left it 23 years ago. Seeing that room, the princess bed with its pink canopy, the toys arranged exactly as a 4-year-old had left them, the bookshelf filled with children's stories, had broken something open in Lauren's chest. The love and grief embedded in every unchanged detail had been overwhelming. "Tell me about the foundation," Dr. Hamilton said, changing the subject to something more positive. Lauren's face lit up. "It's amazing. We're calling it the Luna Lauren Foundation for Missing Children. Daniel's providing the funding, and I'm developing the programs. The goal is to provide support for families of missing children and to fund search efforts," Daniel explained, "but also to help with reunification when children are found. We learned the hard way that finding someone is only the beginning. It feels good to turn something terrible into something that might help other people," Lauren said. "It gives meaning to what we've been through," Dr. Hamilton smiled. "That's significant progress. You're creating something together, building a shared purpose." "There's more good news," Daniel said, pulling out another document. "The investigation into your former supervisor, Monica Caldwell, has been completed. She's been arrested for embezzlement and fraud. Apparently, she's been stealing from the daycare for years, and the false accusations against you were an attempt to deflect attention from her own crimes." Lauren's mouth fell open. "Arrested?" The parents whose children were actually in danger came forward once the truth started coming out. "You've been offered your old job back, with a formal apology from the board." "That's wonderful," Dr. Hamilton said. "How do you feel about returning to teaching?" "I don't think I will," Lauren said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I mean, I love teaching, but I think I want to do something bigger now. Something related to the foundation." Daniel's eyes filled with pride. "Whatever you want to do, you'll have my full support." "Speaking of support," Dr. Hamilton interjected, "how are you both handling the media attention? The story had broken 2 weeks ago, when Marcus Chen's investigation had uncovered Monica's crimes. A reporter had connected the dots between Lauren's firing, Daniel's involvement, and the decades-old missing child case. Within hours, their story was national news. "It's been intense," Lauren admitted. "Reporters calling constantly, photographers outside my apartment. I had to move in with a friend temporarily. I've hired security for both of us," Daniel said. "And my lawyers are working on getting restraining orders against the most aggressive outlets. The media attention has actually helped the foundation," Lauren added. "We've received donations from all over the country, and several families have reached out about their own missing children cases." Dr. Hamilton nodded. "You're both learning to navigate this together, which shows real progress in your relationship." "It doesn't always feel like progress," Lauren admitted. "Sometimes I look at him and feel angry all over again. Angry that we lost so much time. Angry that my childhood was built on lies. Angry that I don't have the memories other daughters have with their fathers. And sometimes I look at her and see all the moments I missed," Daniel added. "Her first day of school, losing her first tooth, teaching her to drive. I grieve for the father I never got to be. But then we have moments," Lauren continued, "like when we're working on foundation plans together, or when he tells me stories about when I was little, or when we discover another weird thing we have in common. And I think maybe we can build something new, even if we can't get back what we lost." Dr. Hamilton leaned back in her chair. "That's exactly what healthy grief and healing looks like. Acknowledging the loss while still being open to the possibility of new connection. I have something for you," Daniel said suddenly, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a small wrapped package. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, trying to decide when to give it to you." Lauren unwrapped the gift carefully. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a star-shaped pendant, clearly expensive but elegant rather than ostentatious. "I bought this for Luna's 5th birthday," Daniel said quietly. "The birthday she never had with me. I've kept it all these years, hoping someday. I know you're not 5 anymore, and I know you're Lauren now, not Luna. But I thought maybe..." Lauren's eyes filled with tears as she fastened the necklace around her neck. The star settled perfectly against her collarbone, as if it had always belonged there. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you," for the first time since they'd been reunited. Daniel reached out and gently squeezed her hand. The contact was brief, but it felt like a bridge being built between their separate islands of grief and hope. "We have time now," he said softly. "All the time in the world to figure this out." Lauren squeezed back. "All the time in the world." 6 months had passed since the DNA test results changed everything. Lauren stood in the marble lobby of the newly constructed Elizabeth Monroe Kingsley Memorial School, watching contractors put the finishing touches on what would become the most innovative educational facility in Chicago. The building itself was a testament to transformation, modern and bright, filled with natural light, and designed specifically for children who'd experienced trauma. "The art therapy wing is almost complete," Daniel said, joining her near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the school's playground. "The contractor says we'll be ready for the soft opening next month." Lauren nodded. Still amazed by how quickly her life had changed, the foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations, and this school, built in memory of the mother she'd never really known, represented everything they'd learned about healing and second chances. "Dr. Hamilton thinks I'm ready to take on the director position full-time," Lauren said. "No more training wheels. You've been ready for months. You just needed to believe in yourself." Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, like two people learning a new language together. The anger and grief were still there, probably always would be, but they'd found ways to channel those emotions into something productive. Lauren couldn't call him Dad yet. The word still felt foreign in her mouth. But Daniel, spoken with warmth and affection, was enough for now. "There's something I need to tell you," Lauren said, fingering the star necklace she now wore every day. "About Aunt Irene, Rosemary." Daniel's expression grew serious. "Is she okay? The nursing home said she's been declining. She's fading. The doctors say maybe a few more weeks, but she's been asking for both of us. She wants to talk to us together one more time." "Are you ready for that?" Lauren had visited Rosemary regularly over the past months. working through the complex emotions of loving someone who'd built your entire life on a lie. It had been Dr. Hamilton's suggestion that healing required understanding, not just judgment. I think so. She's been showing me things, telling me stories about when I was little. Some of them are beautiful, Daniel. The way she loved me, the sacrifices she made. It doesn't excuse what she did. But it helps you understand why she did it? Yes, and I think it might help you too. They drove to Sunset Manor in comfortable silence, both lost in thought. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the world in shades of gold that reminded Lauren of the pictures in The Heart of the Stars. She still carried the book everywhere, but now it felt less like a lifeline and more like a bridge between who she'd been and who she was becoming. Rosemary was in her bed when they arrived, looking impossibly small and frail. Her arthritis had worsened, and the medications for her increasing pain made her drift in and out of consciousness. But when she saw them together, her eyes cleared with startling clarity. "My 2 children," she whispered, reaching out with shaking hands. Lauren took one hand while Daniel, after a moment's hesitation, took the other. "I wanted to show you something," Rosemary said, gesturing weakly toward a box on her bedside table. "Letters, all the letters I wrote but never sent." Lauren opened the box to find hundreds of envelopes, all addressed to Daniel Kingsley in Rosemary's careful handwriting. Some were yellowed with age, dating back to just weeks after Luna's disappearance. Others were more recent, chronicling Lauren's milestones, graduations, birthdays, achievements. "Read one," Rosemary requested. Lauren selected an envelope dated September 15th, 2003, exactly 1 year after the kidnapping. Her hands trembled as she opened it and began to read aloud. "Dear Mr. Kingsley, today marks 1 year since I took Luna from your home, and not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you. I see your face on the news sometimes, at fundraisers for missing children, and my heart breaks for the pain I've caused. She started kindergarten yesterday. She was so excited, so proud of her new backpack. She told me she wants to be a teacher when she grows up because she wants to help children who are sad. Even at 5, she has the biggest heart. I know what I did was unforgivable. I know I stole more than just a child. I stole your future as her father, your chance to watch her grow, your right to be the parent she deserves. But please know that she is loved, so deeply loved, and that every day I try to be worthy of the gift of raising her. I call her Lauren now because Luna felt too painful. It belonged to the life I took from her. But sometimes, late at night when I'm reading her bedtime stories, she still remembers fragments. She asks about the man who used to sing to her, about the big house with the pretty windows. I tell her those were just dreams, but we both know better. I'm a coward for not sending this letter, for not bringing her home where she belongs. But I'm also a mother now, and the thought of losing her destroys me. I hope someday you can forgive me. I hope someday she can forgive me too. Forever sorry, Rosemary." Lauren's voice broke on the last words. Daniel was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he listened to the anguish in every sentence. "There are hundreds more," Rosemary whispered. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone. I told you about all of it, even though I never had the courage to send them." "Why are you showing us this now?" Daniel asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I'm dying, and I need you both to understand something." Rosemary's voice grew stronger, more urgent. "What I did was wrong. Taking Luna was wrong. Lying to both of you was wrong. But loving her was never wrong. Raising her to be the incredible woman she is today, that was never wrong." She looked directly at Daniel. "I know you hate me. You have every right to hate me. But before I die, I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was angry and impulsive and stupid, but I never meant for it to go on so long. And I need you to know that Luna, Lauren, was loved every single day of her life." "I know that," Daniel said quietly. "I can see it in who she's become. The kindness, the compassion, the way she fights for children who need protection. That came from you." "It came from both of us," Lauren interjected. "I have Daniel's eyes and his stubbornness and his need to fix things. But I have your heart, Rosemary. Your instinct to protect people who can't protect themselves." Rosemary smiled through her tears. "You're the best of both of us, and none of our mistakes. I want to ask you something, Daniel said suddenly. Elizabeth, did you know how sick she was? Did you see something that morning that made you think Luna was in danger? Rosemary was quiet for a long moment. She was getting worse. The drinking, the disappearing for hours, the way she looked at Luna sometimes, like she was a burden instead of a blessing. That morning when I found Luna alone, crying, I'd seen Elizabeth do that before, leave her alone when she couldn't cope. But you didn't take her to protect her from Elizabeth specifically. No, I took her because I was angry at both of you, at her for abandoning her child, at you for letting it happen. I wanted to scare you into being better parents. Rosemary's voice broke. I never imagined it would become permanent. I never imagined the investigation, the media, the way it would spiral out of control. Daniel nodded slowly. I believe you, and I want you to know. I forgive you. The words seemed to lift a weight from Rosemary's shoulders. She sagged back against her pillows, relief flooding her features. I forgive you too, Lauren said, squeezing Rosemary's hand. For the lies, for the pain you caused Daniel, for stealing those years from us. But I also thank you for loving me, for giving me a good life, for making me strong enough to handle the truth when it finally came out. Will you do something for me? Rosemary asked. Will you take care of each other? You've both been alone for so long, carrying so much pain. You have a chance now to be a real family. We're working on it, Lauren said, glancing at Daniel. It's not easy, building a relationship as adults, but we're committed to trying. And the foundation, the school, growing every day, Daniel said. We've helped reunite 12 families so far, and the school will serve over 300 children when it opens. What happened to us, as painful as it was, is helping other people find their way home. Rosemary smiled. Then maybe some good came from all the bad after all. She died peacefully 3 days later, with Lauren holding her hand and Daniel sitting quietly in the corner. Her last words were, "Thank you for forgiving me," whispered so softly Lauren almost missed them. They buried her in a small ceremony attended by a handful of nursing home staff and the few friends Rosemary had made in her final years. Lauren chose the headstone inscription, Rosemary Bennett Langford, beloved mother and protector. She loved with a flawed but faithful heart. Standing at the graveside, Lauren felt the final piece of her complicated grief settle into place. Rosemary had been wrong, but she'd also been loving. She'd stolen and lied, but she'd also sacrificed and protected. Like most people, she'd been neither villain nor saint, but something more complex and human. Are you okay? Daniel asked as they walked away from the grave. I am, Lauren said, and for the first time in months, she truly meant it. I think we both are. That night, they went to Daniel's house and sat in Luna's old bedroom, which they'd finally decided to transform into a home office for the foundation. As they packed away the childhood toys and princess furniture, Lauren found a photo album hidden behind the bed. Look at this, she said, opening it to find pictures of herself as a baby and toddler with both Daniel and Elizabeth. We were happy once, weren't we? We were, Daniel confirmed. We can be again, differently, but genuinely, as if to prove his point. Lauren spontaneously hugged him, the first time she'd initiated physical contact since learning the truth. It felt natural, right? Like coming home after a very long journey. I love you, she said into his shoulder. I can't call you Dad yet, but I love you. I love you too, Luna Lauren, he replied, using the name that honored both who she'd been and who she'd become. And I'm so proud of the woman you are. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the world in pristine white. A fresh start, a clean slate, a chance to begin again. 1 year later, Lauren stood in the center of Luna Memorial Park, watching as hundreds of people gathered for the dedication ceremony. The park had been built on the exact spot where she'd disappeared 24 years ago, transformed from a site of tragedy into a beacon of hope for missing children and their families. You look beautiful, sweetheart, Daniel said. Approaching with a bouquet of white roses, he'd started calling her sweetheart a few months ago, and Lauren had discovered she loved the endearment. It felt natural, warm, like something that had always belonged between them. Lauren smoothed her blue dress, the same shade she'd worn in childhood photos with Elizabeth, and touched the star necklace at her throat. Are you ready for this? I've been ready for 24 years. The crowd included families they'd helped through the foundation, missing children who'd been found, and parents who were still searching. Lauren spotted several faces that had become dear to her. Mrs. Chen, whose 8-year-old daughter had been reunited with the family after 3 years. Marcus Williams, a teenager who'd aged out of foster care and found his birth parents through their DNA database. Little Emma from her old daycare, now 8 years old and one of the first students at Elizabeth Monroe Kingsley Memorial School. Miss Lauren, Emma broke free from her parents and ran toward them. "Look what I made for you." She handed Lauren a construction paper card covered in glitter and childish handwriting. "Thank you for helping lost kids find their way home." "It's perfect," Lauren said, kneeling to hug the little girl who'd inadvertently started this entire journey, if Monica hadn't falsely accused her about Emma's playground accident. Lauren might never have been walking down that street when Daniel saw her book. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor's voice crackled through the sound system, "please take your seats for the dedication ceremony." Lauren and Daniel made their way to the small stage erected near the park's centerpiece. A beautiful bronze sculpture of children holding hands in a circle, their faces turned upward toward a sky full of stars. At the base, an inscription read, "For every child searching for home, and every family that never stops looking." Before we begin the formal dedication, the mayor continued, "I'd like to invite Lauren Carter Kingsley to share her story." Lauren had legally changed her name 6 months ago, combining her birth name with the identity she'd built as an adult. Lauren Carter Kingsley, a name that honored her past while embracing her future. She approached the podium, looking out at the crowd of faces both familiar and strange. In the front row, she spotted Dr. Hamilton, who'd helped them navigate the complex terrain of their rebuilt relationship. Next to her sat Marcus Chen, Daniel's investigator who'd become an unexpected friend in the Foundation's head of missing persons cases. 24 years ago, I disappeared from this very spot," Lauren began, her voice carrying clearly through the warm spring air. "For most of my life, I believed that disappearance was the worst thing that could happen to a family. Today, I know better." She paused, finding Daniel's eyes in the crowd. He was crying already, but his face shone with pride. "The worst thing isn't the disappearance. It's giving up hope. It's stopping the search. It's accepting that love isn't strong enough to bridge any distance, survive any trauma, or heal any wound." Lauren pulled out a familiar book, The Heart of the Stars, now carefully preserved and rebound, but still bearing the original tear in the cover that had helped Daniel recognize it. This book was my connection to a life I couldn't remember, to parents I thought I'd lost, to a love that never stopped calling me home. But it wasn't the book itself that held the magic. It was the love that had been poured into every reading, every page turn, every moment shared between a father and daughter. She opened the book to a page near the end, where the Princess Star finally finds her way back to her constellation family. The story tells us that even when we're lost, even when we can't see our way home, love creates a path. Sometimes that path takes 24 years to reveal itself. Sometimes it leads through pain and confusion and mistakes that seem unforgivable. But if we hold on to hope, if we keep believing in the possibility of reunion, love will always light the way. The crowd was silent, many dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Lauren saw parents clutching photos of their own missing children, and she felt the weight of responsibility that came with being a symbol of hope. The Luna Lauren Foundation exists because my father never stopped looking for me, and because a woman who made terrible choices loved me enough to keep me safe until he could find me. We exist because families like yours refuse to give up, because love is stronger than loss, and because every child deserves to come home." She gestured toward the bronze sculpture. "This park isn't just a memorial to the children who've been lost. It's a promise to the children who are still missing. We will never stop looking. We will never stop hoping. We will never stop believing that love can overcome anything." Lauren closed the book and returned to her seat as the crowd erupted in applause. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with an emotion too complex for words. The ceremony continued with remarks from officials and families, but Lauren's attention drifted to the playground where children were already beginning to explore the new equipment. Their laughter carried on the breeze, a sound of pure joy that seemed to bless the space where so much sorrow had once lived. As the formal events concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Lauren and Daniel found themselves alone by the sculpture. The bronze children seemed to glow in the late afternoon sunlight, their upturned faces full of hope and wonder. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day we met for therapy?" Lauren asked. "You said maybe the kindest thing you could do was let me keep living my life without you." Daniel nodded. "I was terrified of disrupting the life you'd built. I'm so grateful you didn't make that choice these past 2 years. Learning to be your daughter, building the foundation together, creating something meaningful from our pain. It's been the most difficult and most rewarding thing I've ever done. Even when you wanted to strangle me during those early family therapy sessions," Lauren laughed. "Especially then, learning to fight with you, to disagree and still love each other, to work through problems instead of walking away. That's what real family does." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last few families gather their children and head home. As the sun began to set, Daniel pulled out his phone. "I have something to show you," he said, scrolling through his photos. "I got the ultrasound pictures this morning." Lauren's breath caught. The pregnancy had been unexpected, but wonderful. A gift that felt like life's way of saying it was time to create new joy alongside healing old wounds, she and James. The Foundation's legal counsel, whom she'd been dating for 8 months, had been thrilled to discover they were expecting. "Look at that profile," Daniel said, zooming in on the ultrasound image. "She's going to have your nose. Or yours. We have the same nose, remember?" "True, but she's definitely going to have your stubborn streak." Lauren placed her hand on her still small bump. "We've decided on her name. Oh, Elizabeth Rosemary Kingsley Morrison. Elizabeth for the grandmother she'll never meet, but whose love for reading and stories lives on in both of us. Rosemary for the woman who made mistakes but loved me unconditionally." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "That's perfect. Absolutely perfect. I want you to be her grandfather," Lauren said. "Really be her grandfather. I want you to read to her every night, to spoil her ridiculously, to be the hands-on family member you didn't get to be for me. I would be honored." As full darkness fell, park lights began to twinkle like earthbound stars. Daniel and Lauren made their way to a bench beneath one of the larger lights, and Daniel pulled out a worn copy of The Heart of the Stars. "One more time," he asked. "One more time." They read together, their voices blending in perfect harmony as they told the story of the little Princess Star who got lost but never stopped believing she could find her way home. When they reached the end, Lauren closed the book and looked up at the real stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Do you think she can see us?" Lauren asked. "Elizabeth, I think she's been watching over both of us all along. I think she's the reason you kept that book, the reason you became a teacher, the reason you have such a gift for helping children. Her love didn't die with her. It lived on in you." Lauren leaned against Daniel's shoulder, feeling the completeness that had eluded her for 27 years. "I used to dream about having a real family, a father who loved me, siblings to share secrets with, grandparents who spoiled me. I thought I'd missed my chance. And now I know that family isn't just about the time you have together. It's about the love you carry for each other. We lost 23 years, but we have the rest of our lives to make up for it." They sat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the city settling into sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more families to help, more children to find, more work to be done. But tonight, in this place where everything had begun, they were simply a father and daughter who'd found their way back to each other. Above them, the stars shone with steady light, just as they had on the night 24 years ago when a little girl named Luna had been taken from this very spot. But now those same stars bore witness to something beautiful, a love that had survived separation, forgiven mistakes, and transformed tragedy into hope. The heart of their constellation was finally complete, and it would shine forever.